BBC Podcast. You can get all our podcasts and our terms of use at bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to Assignment on the BBC World Service. I'm Wira Davis in the Argentine capital, Buenos Aires. Get out now is what these demonstrators are chanting. They came out onto the streets in their thousands in February, angry at how the death of one of Argentina's most high-profile prosecutors was being portrayed by the authorities. An official autopsy suggested suicide, but the people on the streets didn't believe that. At this luxury apartment complex in Buenos Aires, 51-year-old Special Prosecutor Alberto Nisman was preparing to deliver a damning report, accusing the Argentine government of being involved in covering up the worst terror attack in the country's history. But just hours before he was due to testify, Nisman was found dead here in his 13th floor apartment with a single gunshot wound to the head. Suicide or murder? After weeks without answers, I've come here to try and piece together Alberto Nisman's final hours and ask the question, who may have wanted him dead? This story begins 21 years ago, on July the 18th, 1994, when a huge bomb tore through the AMIA, a Jewish cultural centre in Buenos Aires. Argentina has the largest Jewish community in Latin America, and on that day in 1994, 85 people were killed as the AMIA building collapsed and nearby shops were badly damaged. It was a scene of utter chaos. Is anyone there? Is she alive? Cries out a rescuer. Much of the evidence was subsequently lost or contaminated, either deliberately or through incompetence. And no one has ever been convicted in connection with the bombing. The bombing of the cultural centre tore the heart out of the city's Jewish community. The building has been rebuilt, but with airport-style security and huge walls protecting it from any new danger on the street. Anita Weinstein survived that bombing, crawling out of the rubble which claimed the lives of many of her friends and colleagues.
They wanted to kill me, and I want to live. And in this life I wanted to be really something that would overcome, not forget, not thinking that it did not happen, but showing them that they did not succeed in killing us.
More than 100 people were inside the headquarters of the Argentine-Israeli Mutual Organization when the explosion ripped the 7-story building to shreds. As a young reporter, I came to Buenos Aires to cover the aftermath of the 1994 bombing. Buenos Aires is home to a large and prosperous Jewish population, but only 21 years later, a huge amount of evidence has been amassed. Interviews, witness statements and wiretaps. Alberto Nisman spent 17 years working on this case. It was his life's work. But it's a crime that is still unresolved. That's an embarrassment for Argentina and for the victims' families, a source of anger and frustration. During all those years of painstaking investigations of the AMIA bombing case, Nisman had made enemies in the government, accusing it of trying to cover up what appeared to be Iran's role in the attack. Nisman trusted few people, and he often worked from his flat. It was here on the 18th of January this year that he was found dead, apparently alone and with a handgun next to his body. There's a huge media and police presence here outside the Tablada Cemetery in Buenos Aires, where Alberto Nisman's body is being brought for burial. There are also a few dozen protesters demanding to know what happened to Alberto Nisman, how and why he was killed. There are hundreds of police keeping the media away from the cemetery at the family's request. And of course, wider questions remain. Many people in Argentina immediately assumed that Nisman had killed himself. Even President Fernández de Kirchner speculated on her Facebook page what may have made him take his own life. One person who disputed those official version of events from the start was Nisman's former partner Sandra Arroyo Salgado.
Yo como mamá de sus hijas, que conviví 17 años.
As the mother of his daughters, I lived with him for 17 years.
In an exclusive interview for the BBC, she told me of her concerns about the crime scene, the time of death, and his state of mind.
No tengo dudas de que él, por su forma de ser, su personalidad.
I have no doubt that he, because of what he was like and his personality, he would not have committed suicide. He was extremely careful about his health, and he was a perfectionist when it came to his medical care. He was very much afraid of dying young. So the very moment when they told me he was found dead and there was a gun at the scene, I knew immediately that he had been killed.
I knew it might break me, Nisman had said on a local news programme just days before he died, admitting that his accusations against the government would make him a marked man. In those last days of his life, Nisman had also acknowledged to his eldest daughter that what he was doing was dangerous, but that he had no choice. His former partner, Sandra Arroyo Salgado, again.
Le dice, yo vengo trabajando desde hace tiempo.
He said, I've been working for some time on something very important. You're going to be very proud of my work, but sometimes in life we don't get to choose the moment things happen, and I need to go back now because I have to give this presentation. It's a project I have been working on for some time, and there is a risk that if I don't go back to give this presentation now, then maybe I will never be able to do it, to show it to Congress. I could lose my job, and the evidence could be lost too.
At the time of his death, Sandra Arroyo Salgado was travelling abroad, and although they were separated, she returned home to the glare of the media. Let the investigation take its course, she said then, surrounded by reporters as she arrived at the investigator's office to give her statement. But appalled by the rapid speed of the autopsy and the failure to preserve evidence at the scene, Arroyo Salgado, a judge herself, began her own inquiries.
La única condición que nos pusieron es la búsqueda de la verdad.
The only thing we are looking for is the truth. By analyzing the photos and videos taken at the autopsy in the morgue, my investigative team came to the conclusion this violent death was certainly not an accident, and they also ruled out that it was suicide.
También descarta la modalidad suicida.
Did you feel there was an attempt by the state, by the authorities, to control things from the very start and to leave you as a family outside?
Es como que la autoridad judicial y las autoridades.
It's as if the judges and the authorities managing the security forces did not consider that Alberto was found dead only 4 days after he filed charges against the president of the nation, the foreign minister, Argentine legislators, community leaders and the security forces, accusing them of no less than a possible cover-up of a terrorist attack that killed 85 people. Official images from the crime scene that we were able to obtain point to a shocking lapse of protocol and procedure at the scene of his death. Pictures show dozens of people walking all over the apartment without protective clothing, and evidence appears to have been improperly handled.
Yo me pregunto, o sea, ¿cuál fue el trabajo del jefe de la...
I wonder what work did the head of the homicide division of the federal police do? He didn't collect any crime scene traces. He didn't take samples of the hair that was there at the scene and that you see in the pictures. He did not take any blood evidence. I also wonder why the head of technical support, why they didn't take any evidence from the computer. They started work on the computer without taking certain precautions. The same with the weapon they found. It was manipulated. The woman now in charge of the official investigation into Nisman's death is Viviana Fine. She denies that her office mishandled those initial hours at the scene.
Que no nos pongan esa famosa ropa séptica es muy común acá en la Argentina. Yo he ido a muchos.
It's common in Argentina that we don't always put on those white antiseptic robes. I've been to many homicides and not seen that kind of clothing that specialists use because we don't touch the scene. We look at what we need to look at where we can. No one stepped on the blood, and the scene of the crime was really only in the bathroom.
However, one of Argentina's leading crime reporters, Ignacio Prieto, says the evidence points more towards a possible assassination, the involvement of others in the prosecutor's death, rather than suicide. It's a theory, he says, which is supported by criminologists from Interpol.
Lo más lógico hubiera sido que si él hace un disparo.
One possibility, if he'd shot himself, would have been for the gun to have fallen or been thrown to the side. But it is hard to imagine how the gun could have made such a 180-degree trajectory. It is very strange. So what the criminologists say is that the scene was arranged. They put the body in a certain way, they put the gun in place, they even used a towel to arrange the body. If you look at it like this, weighing up the evidence for suicide and assassination, the balance of what you see in the photos and in the findings of the investigators, it points more towards murder.
The weapon that killed Nisman, a .22 caliber Bursa handgun, belonged to a 38-year-old computer specialist who worked closely with the prosecutor, Diego Lagomarsino. In a chaotic press conference after the body was found, Lagomarsino denied being part of a conspiracy to kill his boss. Later, he told me his version of events, that Nisman had asked for the gun because he didn't trust his police bodyguards.
Alberto estaba tranquilo. Yo estaba que no sabía dónde.
Alberto was totally calm. I was the one who was a bit nervous. This was a state prosecutor, the most important prosecutor in the country. It wasn't like a bank robber asking me. And he told me straight.
¿Qué? Que era para cuidar a sus hijas.
That he wanted to protect his daughters.
Did you feel you had no choice? You had to give him the gun?
No, no hubo opción.
No, I didn't have an option.
Alberto era muy difícil decirle que no.
Alberto was a hard man to say no to.
You seem quite angry. I mean, is that a fair reflection?
Es que cuando me apuntan a mí.
Yes, because when they point to me as being responsible, they are shifting the focus. Because I know it wasn't me. You can say what you want. If they are looking to me, they are not finding the real killer. They are looking for a scapegoat, and they are not looking in the right place for the truth.
Lagomarsino says he took the gun to Nisman's apartment at around 8 o'clock on the Saturday evening, and then he left. He agrees that he may have been the last person to see the prosecutor alive before he died around midday on the Sunday, as the official autopsy concludes. But Sandra Arroyo Salgado says that Lagomarsino has much more explaining to do after her investigators concluded that Nisman died much earlier on the Saturday night. It's all come down to what happened in those critical 24 hours between when Lagomarsino says he gave Nisman the gun and when the body was found on the Sunday night. One important key to that period is the apparent lack of communication from Nisman after Saturday evening. Rare for such a busy and work-obsessed man. His former partner, Sandra Arroyo Salgado, again.
I feel that the time of death was from the moment he stopped talking on the phone, because he was a person who was constantly on the phone.
Therefore, what you're saying is if Alberto had been alive on Sunday morning, Saturday night, and in the day on Sunday, he would have been active, he would have been phoning people, he would have been contacting people. Instead, we're asked to believe that he was silent all day Sunday.
Es impensado que él
It is inconceivable. It is inconceivable that he did not speak on the phone during that many hours. I had no doubt that something had happened to him, because it was inconceivable that he would go for that many hours without answering calls or replying on WhatsApp. The first thing he did when he got up, for the whole time he lived with me, was to grab the newspaper and read it. Even more so at this time when he himself was in the news.
The majority of Argentines share Arroyo Salgado's suspicion and her scepticism that the case is being handled neither impartially nor independently, and they've taken to the streets to show their frustration. Well, this appalling rain, this really inclement weather may have affected the numbers, but there are still tens of thousands of Argentines walking largely in silence, through the city tonight to express their anger with the government. It's an indication, a demonstration of just how deeply divided society is here. And with only months left of her 8-year presidency, it's probably the biggest crisis that President Fernández de Kirchner has yet had to face.
Yo quiero decirles.
Cristina Fernández de Kirchner is having none of it. Before her own adoring supporters, Argentina's combative president derided the protesters and her critics, suggesting that someone perhaps got to Nisman as a way to undermine her government. The president repeatedly criticised the former prosecutor and his report. But it's a dangerous game, says political analyst and professor Martin Burmer, in a country where people now have little faith in their government and its institutions.
The people in Argentina are very polarized, and the government was playing into that game, using this friend and foe kind of political discourse in order to gain votes and support. So you have people that will believe anything Cristina would say, and then you have people that will believe nothing of what Cristina would say, no matter what kind of evidence you will show them. That's why the impact of this death in this moment. Argentine society is polarized, as I think has never been for many years.
The beautiful Jewish cemetery here in Buenos Aires reflects the size, the history and the importance of this community. In a small corner in the newer part of the cemetery is the grave of Alberto Nisman. His grave covered to overflowing with the small stones of remembrance that Jews place on graves to commemorate the dead. Just a few metres away from Alberto Nisman's grave is a memorial to the victims of the attack at the Jewish Cultural Centre. It's built from some of the remains of the building itself, and just a few metres further on, many of the 85 victims are buried here in the cemetery. 21 years later, a huge amount of evidence has been amassed: interviews, witness statements and wiretaps. The government archives also contain files about the 1992 bombing of the Israeli embassy here. All of this was among the information that in 2006 led Nisman to formally accuse Iran and its ally Hezbollah of being behind the Amia attack. So when, in January 2013, Argentina signed a deal with Iran, establishing a truth commission, ostensibly to jointly investigate the bombing, Nisman couldn't contain his anger.
Creando una comisión de la verdad que le sustrae al juez el conocimiento de la causa, crea un sistema.
On radio and television, he accused President Fernández de Kirchner and Foreign Minister Hector Timmerman of acting unconstitutionally and illegally interfering in the judicial process. It was then, in a move that may have cost him his life, that he began the secret parallel investigation, alleging that the government was part of an elaborate cover-up. President Fernández de Kirchner dismisses this, as does Foreign Minister Timmerman.
Argentina is a country of peace. They have never done anything.
Timmerman, who like Nisman is Jewish, told me it was inconceivable that he would betray the memories of those who died in the Amia bombing, and said that Nisman's allegations against him and the president were baseless.
I exactly know that he drafted an order of arrest against myself, and I will defend myself in court. I only trust in the law. I will go to court.
But you say that in this case you have done nothing wrong, neither you or the president?
Nothing at all. On the contrary, we did more than any other government in order to find out who committed the terrible crime against the Jewish Center. More than any other government.
We know from leaked documents that Nisman was a regular visitor to the US Embassy here in Buenos Aires, and he saw secret intelligence briefings. He's also believed to have had close links with the Israeli Secret Service Mossad. After Nisman died, Hector Timmerman sent open letters to Washington and Israel, warning them to back off the internal affairs of Argentina. Does he somehow suspect that foreign agencies had a hand in the prosecutor's death?
I think that there are countries whose intelligence services operate in third countries without the authorization of those countries. What I am saying in my letter is just telling them that if they are doing that, they should stop.
Is this all coincidental? I mean, are you sending these warning letters to the Americans and the Israelis because of what we've learned from the Nisman case?
That's something I prefer not to answer.
If I can push you slightly differently, I mean, do you have evidence that there were foreign agencies at work? Do we know that?
We don't send letters without evidence.
So what does this have to do with Nisman's death? And what reasons could the American and Israeli secret services have had for wanting Nisman dead? After all, neither the US nor Israel are friends of either Hezbollah or Iran. It shows the murky world that Nisman was navigating. And foreign spies weren't the only ones in Nisman's contact book. Overlooking the ornate and famously pink presidential palace, some say the real seat of power is the much greyer headquarters of Argentina's internal intelligence agency. For decades, its operations director was Antonio or Jaime Stiuso, a man so elusive that only one known picture of him exists. He worked closely with Alberto Nisman on the Amia case, feeding him wiretaps and other sensitive information. After Stiuso was suddenly sacked by the president in December, one theory is that Nisman became an unwitting pawn in a much bigger battle between the government and an intelligence service not used to being challenged. Argentine judge and international war crimes prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo says the power still wielded by military-era spies makes the lives of prosecutors who want to take on the government very difficult indeed.
In the 70s, between 70s and 80s, our intelligence system was part of the massive atrocities committed by the dictatorship. They identify those people under suspicions, and then some of them participated in the abductions and the torture, and there were executions. This is over. It's stopped, and we prosecute the junta leader for that. The Nisman case exposed that the democratic government did not change the functioning of the intelligence system. Yes, they are no more committing massive atrocities, but the intelligence system is used to manage money for political purposes, to spy opposition members, and to control judges and prosecutors that want to investigate the government. So that's what we have here. And Nisman case exposed that.
Nisman was using the intelligence services, but could he also have been manipulated by them? In a city full of secrets and suspicions, the one person who got really close to Nisman, and as we've already heard, allegedly gave him the gun, was IT specialist Diego Lagomarsino. But was he also an intelligence agent? And as some have alleged, did he have a role in Nisman's death? No, Lagomarsino told me emphatically. His job was merely to look after the prosecutor's computer needs.
Tengo de mi lado la verdad, que sé que yo no fui. Y eso me sobra.
I have truth on my side. I know that I didn't do it, and this saves me. God knows I didn't do it. I know I didn't do it. And it will be proven. There are already ways to take me out of the frame. And when all this is over, they will ask for my forgiveness. And I will give it to them.
This apparent political murder has gripped Argentina. There are dozens of television cameras, reporters and satellite trucks here in downtown Buenos Aires, outside the public prosecutor's office. The country's much maligned legal system is under incredible pressure to come up with results. But many people, especially those connected with the 94 bombing, are sceptical, are doubtful that anything can be achieved anytime soon. Sergio Vida is from the Simon Wiesenthal Center.
I am not optimistic. I would say I'm skeptic. But at the same time, we cannot give up. We must fight for justice, because if you don't take these issues seriously, then you expose yourself to further attacks. And Argentina holds a debt with its own citizens, and particularly holds a debt with the families of the victims of the AMIA bombing.
Alberto Nisman never got to the Argentine Congress to deliver his controversial report. It was discredited by some, but those who knew Nisman say he was convinced by the veracity of his work and was certainly not suicidal. But he is dead, lying here in the Jewish cemetery in Buenos Aires, and by the end of the year, Argentines will have elected a new president and a new Congress. For the families of Alberto Nisman and the victims of the AMIA bombing 21 years ago, hope is fading with time. To come back here 2 decades after the AMIA bombing and see such little progress suggests that Argentina's transformation to a fully functioning democracy is not yet complete. That the system has also failed a man who dedicated his life to investigating the AMIA attack is a tragedy. Few people here now believe that this was a case of suicide, but those failings mean we may never know who killed Alberto Nisman. I'm Willa Davis, and that is all from this edition of Assignment. To hear more from the series, go to bbcworldservice.com/assignment.